My name is Ara Nazarian, and on behalf of the ARF of Boston, I welcome you. We're delighted to host Mr. Artur Martirosyan, an expert in negotiations and ethnopolitical conflicts this evening. As you're well aware, for 2 months, the 120,000 Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh, including 30,000 children, have been under blockade, with the situation deteriorating on a daily basis. Nonetheless, the people of Artsakh have demonstrated incredible resolve to stay in their ancestral homeland. This morning, our community held a protest on the front steps of the State House to show our solidarity with the Armenians of Artsakh. The dire situation in Artsakh is only the latest escalation of events resultant from the humiliating losses from the 44-day war in 2020 and the anti-Armenian policies of the ruling elite during the past 4 years. None of what has been happening to date is a surprise to those who follow the region's politics and are aware of the situation and the written and unwritten agreements made between the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan. In the diaspora, our actions are centered around advocacy, financial support, moral support, and constant engagement. We live in the era of information, where social media and social engineering play decisive roles in shaping public opinion and policy. We hope that these lecture series offer an opportunity for our communities to engage with thought leaders, become more aware of the nuances of the challenges facing our nation, in order to help search for more effective means of engagement and support for our people in Armenia and Artsakh. It is no surprise that the Armenian nation is at a historical crossroads, where the independent state and its very identity are at stake. Mr. Martirosyan's presentation, entitled "Whither Armenia? Reading the Negotiation Game, Thinking in Scenarios," will provide an analysis of the negotiation processes in the past few years and potential scenarios that may unravel going forward, and what it would take to avoid the traps of becoming a gubernia or a vilayet. Mr. Martirosyan, a graduate of St. Petersburg University and Yale University, he is a negotiation, communication, and leadership trainer and consultant. After joining the conflict management group in 1994, for 18 years, he worked with Professor Roger Fisher, the founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project, on several projects in the former Soviet Union and the Middle East. In his 29 career as a negotiation specialist, Mr. Martirosyan has been involved in the decision and implementation of a series of strategic assistance projects in the complex ethnopolitical conflicts of Chechnya, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, Israel-Palestine, Iraq, and Russia and Ukraine. In the 90s, as a co-director of the Network of Early Warning and Ethnological Monitoring of Conflict in the former Soviet Unions, he authored analytical articles on the status of conflicts and negotiation processes in the Caucasus, and designed innovative approaches to studying the impact of stereotyping on negotiations and the role of media in transforming cognitive and attitudinal aspects of public opinion on conflicts. Mr. Martirosyan has managed the Israeli Palestinian Negotiation Partners program that engaged senior technical advisors to the top decision makers of the sides in a joint negotiation skills development process. From 2001 to 2008, he was the director of the Momentum Project, leadership culture change in the former Soviet Union. In 8 years, hundreds of senior young policymakers from Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Ukraine went through training in leadership, negotiation, and communication skills at the Roger Fisher House in Cambridge. From 2004 to 2019, he supervised several highly successful projects to build networks of professional negotiators in Iraq, Kosovo, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and South Sudan. Tonight, Mr. Martirosyan will deliver his remarks, and we will follow them with a Q&A session with the participants. Please type your questions at the time to my attention in the chat box, and we will offer them to Mr. Martirosyan. Mr. Martirosyan, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
For being here.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I will go straight to the question with Armenia. It's a $64,000 question. And I think there is no lack of specialists, pundits today, political analysts who are trying to provide some forecasting. I'm wearing a negotiator's hat, so I will provide you some of my own analysis now from the lens of a negotiator. And when we are away from the negotiation table, what we do well, I think, is we analyze, just as chess players. We analyze what the other side is thinking, about the game, how the other side is planning to achieve its goals, what are the strategies that they may employ, what resources they have to employ those strategies, and so forth. So it resembles chess with one exception, that in chess, draws are often possible. In negotiations, the cliche of win-win I think, belongs to ivory towers. In my 30-year career as a negotiator, I'd say that is happening less frequently than one would wish. So let's turn to not to the other side, what I typically do, right? I would need to put myself in the shoes of Aliyev to understand what his next moves might be to achieve the goals that he has. And when I'm talking about negotiations is not just what happens at the table of negotiation. Any move the sides make is part of negotiation, because that move is an attempt to influence the other side or to get what you want by other means than just communicating at the table. This evening, to answer the question with Armenia, I would need to do that for Nikol Pashinyan. And it may be no less difficult for me to do that than to put myself in the shoes of Mr. Aliyev. We could go back in time to before 2018, because as a negotiator, I want to understand him, and I want to almost get to a palpable sense of his worldview and mental model and psychological profile of the man, right? Because he's the negotiator. Is it doable? Yes, it's doable. And understand someone doesn't mean that I have to agree with him. Again, just as a chess player, I just want to understand how he thinks from his behavior and whatnot. It's a very controversial theme when you look at Pashinyan as a negotiator from 2018. You can sense that there is a combination of inexperience as an international negotiator. I will be providing some snippets of evidence for whatever I'm saying. For instance, in 2018, in May, he stated in the Republic Square of Yerevan that anything that is going to be negotiated on Artsakh is going to be consulted with the people in that very square, in the Agora. As I was listening to him, I could understand one thing. He doesn't have any experience in international negotiations, because it's impossible. It's untenable. You cannot do that. That's not happening in international negotiations. So it was a promise, a populist promise. And from that promise, he traveled in less than 2 years to, I'm negotiating whatever I want to negotiate in the parliament, and to essentially closing the entire process. So there is a proposal that was sent to Azerbaijan, a counter proposal from the Armenian side, but very few people have seen it or know what's in that counter proposal. So we go from a promise of transparency, which is untenable, total transparency, to total closing of the process. Next, in Dushanbe, he says about Aliyev after his first meeting in the elevator that he's a cultured man. He has the impression that he's a cultured man. That cultured man, if he didn't give the orders to Safarov to kill our officer Martirosyan in Budapest, then at least he turned him into a national hero. So you have to be very careful when you make that kind of a statement about the other side. I understand he needs to build rapport with the other side, but there are other ways for doing that. Again, maybe inexperience, I thought at the time, but there are already signs of also incompetence. And the biggest sign of that incompetence came when he started to say that he's going to start the negotiations from his point. Why? Because I saw in my own experience, firsthand experience, what happened when Saakashvili said exact same words about negotiating with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and what happened. So negotiators understand the importance of continuity. You come in, you are a new person, mediators and the other side may give you some time to catch up, but you cannot really play as if none of what had been agreed before you or pre-agreed is irrelevant. You can't play that game. And he himself, in his own words, there was a leaked tape, stated that when Putin, Lukashenko, and Nazarbayev put on the table the package that included the exchange of territories, the Russian peacekeepers, the Lavrov plan, essentially, he said that he was going to play crazy inadequate with them. So that was his own conversation. Really, I mean, this is getting to a point where you can get nervous that somebody like Pashinyan might be negotiating, and the fate of the country and Artsakh is in his hands. Next comes even more controversial move from him in 2019. By that time, he knows what's on the table, but yet he goes in August to Stepanakert, and that's where he says Artsakh is Armenia and full stop. So essentially, he rejects what's on the table of negotiations, but at the same time, he knows that sooner or later he will have to either accept it or go to the alternatives, and the alternative is a war. Maybe in July 2020, we really believe that we have a chance of winning in a war. But then after the war, he quickly started to say that he knew that it was impossible. When did he know that? He knew that when the chief of staff of Armenia reported to him after the first couple of days of warfare. But he continued to reject the proposal that still could leave Artsakh with Hadrut and Shushi intact and Armenian, and Kelbajar and Lachin under Armenian control. But he continued, and then he explained that refusal to stop the war at that point by saying that you would not accept, you wouldn't have accepted it, meaning the Armenian people would not have accepted it. So it means that for him, as an opportunist, it's more important what he gets in the negotiations than what happens to the common interest and to the common good. I could go on and on. I have done, I think, some significant research into also his psychological profiling, but I think that's a different conversation. I would need to turn now into what he was doing as a negotiator with the major players. With the major players, he had chosen the game of alternatives. He came to power on a very strong anti-Russian platform. Before he was elected as prime minister, his position on CSTO, Eurasian Union, and the even the base, the Russian base, were negative. So he comes to power. He quickly understands that the Armenian, what international relation theories call interdependence on Russia, is both highly sensitive and vulnerable. And therefore, he changes that position, and he now becomes a very, at least in his public statements, very pro-Putinite player, which probably angered somewhat Europeans and Americans observing this game, because they were hoping that he'd come and he'd continue his line as an opposition player. Things started to change again with the, I'm jumping forward a little bit, change again with the war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine brought about a number of uncertainties, and we'll have to deal with those uncertainties to understand Whither Armenia. As a negotiator, I always do that with my clients, with whoever I work, because the worst thing that can happen at the table is a surprise. So you need to be prepared for most likely scenarios possible, right? What the other side may do or put on the table. So thinking in scenarios is very important. And before we go into the scenarios, let me finish the importance of this alternatives game. What is alternatives game? Alternatives game is when you have partnership or relationship with one player, and that player cannot satisfy your interests or needs. and you turn to another player as an alternative, and you say, okay, Russia, if you cannot do what you committed to do, if you promised to do, if you have in this treaty, in this agreement, then I'm going to turn to the other players to provide that. This is not an uncommon game, by the way, played by many in international politics, but with one very important caveat, or rather two. One is if you are playing the alternatives, you need to be very confident that that alternative is real. So if you are saying no to Russians, then Europeans, the West, are going to come and deliver or give you something that will address your security dilemma, which is the most important. If you are not confident enough, or even worse, if you are bluffing, then the first player, in this case Russia, not only will demand a higher price when you go back to him for the same service, but will essentially view you as an untrustworthy player. Well, Pashinyan didn't have good rapport with Putin, no matter what he was saying publicly. It was obvious that the relationship was not of trust. And why that is important? Because for Russians, I think in this whole game, especially moving into the conflict in an open conflict war with Ukraine, if he has interests and if he doesn't trust you, then he'd do whatever is important for interest, and he can completely neglect your interests or do it even at your expense. That's Russians. I mean, we may not like it. We may say whatever we want to say about it. But again, as a negotiator, I want to understand how they're likely to behave. And as a negotiator, I want to get what's in my interest, not to protest that because that may not change much, but to get what is important for my national interest. So when the Brussels track opened in the negotiations of Warsaw, I think Pashinyan hurriedly jumped on that track. And that was probably, I'm thinking about it, probably in the interest of Aliyev. Because Aliyev wants to make sure that Russia does not see Armenia as a partner in all of this. Armenia doesn't have the alternative of Russia. And Azerbaijan and Turkey together can deal with the West, right? So the West has so many interests. It's not just oil and gas. It's Iran. It's in combination with Israel. So many interests, and therefore they're important players for the West, and they'd be able to inoculate whatever damaging moves Armenia may find against their strategies. So that's what Aliyev was thinking. That's why he didn't reject the Brussels process. Moreover, they invited Pashinyan in, and Pashinyan went and started to participate. Obviously, Moscow viewed this even before the war with Ukraine. For Russia, it would have been a slap in their face, right? Because we have our own process. We are the mediator. Yes, we are not delivering everything for Armenians, but hey, this is what you're going to get with us. It's better than what you can get with anybody else or yourselves. So that's the Russian thinking. And now they see that you are not only going into this with just another player, but a player with whom we have an existential conflict right now. So it's a very dangerous game in that way, right? So and if we go back to where Ara was starting with the pain and suffering of the Armenian community in Artsakh, why Russians are not doing much to stop the Azeri ecologists? Because in a very ruthless Russian way, they're sending a message through that suffering to the Armenian people and Pashinyan. You are going to the West. Let's see if the West is going to deliver what you want. Let's see how that's going to play into your interests. Again, I mean, we can obviously discuss and condemn that Russian behavior, but that would not change much. I mean, we need to think what needs to be done to negotiate a better outcome for the Armenian side in our national interest. So quickly to the scenarios. I've prepared a slide and I will ask Ara to put it on the screen. This is on the back of the napkin. Scenario planning is a much more complicated process. It involves quantitative methods. I have done this, I often do this very quickly before I turn to quantification and probability analysis. So we have two major uncertainties, and these are two axes. One, everybody wants to know how it's going to end, right? Russia-Ukraine war, and it's broader for me. It's not just Russia-Ukraine war. It's Russia and the West, and they're competing for domination, for hegemony, at least in our part of the world. So below is the West, and that is if the West wins, Russia is defeated in Ukraine, has to eat its humble pie. That's the West below on the axis. And on the top is Russia wins in Ukraine, and Russia becomes the regional hegemon, unquestioned regional hegemon. So these are two extremes, and then stalemate in between. On the axis below, I'm looking at one very important variable for us Armenians. That is our capacity for collective action. Why that is important? Because we as a nation don't have many resources. Out of 7 forms of capital that there are, we have some in, probably some in science culture maybe, but most of our capital is human capital. So if we are not able to put our action together, if we're going to stay fragmented in apathy, which can be observed right now, which is to the left on your screens, right? So that's one extreme. Then we're going to have different outcomes in our scenarios, and I'll talk about it later, a minute later. So then at the other extreme is we have consolidation, national consolidation, and what I call purposeful mobilization. So we can stay mobilized, at least in some ways comparable to what we had 30 years ago when the Karabakh movement started. And I'm here talking about sufficient consensus for mobilization. It's obvious that you cannot really find a vision that would unite everybody. But at least we need a sufficient consensus around certain issues, negotiated consensus that will allow us to stay consolidated and not just for ad hoc issues, but for a bigger vision of who we are, why we're going to stay and fight for Artsakh, and what Artsakh really means for our statehood, and what we might lose if we lose Artsakh right now. So in the middle, you have this ad hoc mobilization. So if these are the two uncertainties, and then there are 4 scenarios. I mean, these scenarios are not going to be, they're possible. They have different probability, and I'm not going to go into the probability analysis with you right now. But these are the scenarios. We stay fragmented. There is apathy. Apathy reigns among Armenians, and the West wins. Interestingly, the West, if we stay divided, if we stay fragmented, is very likely to delegate this entire region to its partner Turkey, right? At least for now, Turkey is the partner. So what may happen is we make more concessions to Aliyev, but they have made very clear to us what their goal is, right? And the maps that are circulating now in Azerbaijan, it's not just wishful thinking. They think that it's real to get this, right? And when I say vilayet Armenistan, it doesn't mean that Armenia will lose the symbolic nature of statehood. Symbolically, it may stay, but they will carve enough territory and take under their control as they're planning, right? From Sevan, which they call Gyoycha, to Zangezur and whatnot. And that way, you will be entirely dependent on the on Turks, surrounded from all sides, except Georgia in the north, which can be very unreliable. And therefore, they may not even need to put military pressure on you anymore. There will be other instruments at their disposal to get you do what they want you to do. Right, a very nasty scenario, but it's possible. I mean, and I've been talking about this from November 2020, right? If we stay fragmented and if Russia loses, then this is possible, right? The next scenario, number two, is gubernia. And gubernia is, again, we are fragmented and Russia wins. Russia becomes a hegemon and says, okay, we're not going to play anymore with these, your democracies, your European vector and whatnot. So this is the deal for you Armenians. It's gubernia. Just as in 1833, there was Armянskaya Oblast that was established by the Russian Empire. So back in there, I don't want to go too much into this. It's obvious. So there are also scenarios, better scenarios for us, which are to the right of this. And in both cases, they will depend on how consolidated we're going to be. So our human capital and the human capital will need to be negotiated on so many different aspects to act as one to make these two scenarios possible. The West wins or Russia wins. I mean, Russia wins, we are consolidated, we can negotiate and become a player, much like Finland was during the Cold War. Yes, close to the Soviet Union, but still playing this kind of a go-between between the West and the Soviets at the time. And I have Hermes here, the god of trade here, because I like scenarios to be memorable, right? So it's could have put Finland here, but this is better probably. And finally, West wins. West wins. We will have to negotiate with them why we need to stay out of the Turkish and Azeri influence, why we need to why the West needs us in the region with Artsakh, because we can be a regional leader in promoting Western values. So here are the scenarios. And when I'm talking about the scenarios, when I'm talking about the scenarios, it doesn't mean that I want these scenarios. I'm just saying they are possible. They have different probability. And the way I see it, we are now here. It says we are here, right? We stalemate 60-40. Some pundits and specialists are saying Russia is defeated. I don't buy into that. I don't know if it's defeated. It's a 60-40 proposition, and I don't know which way is 40. And unlike many, I've been in every single town that is under fire along the line of contact in that war right now. Therefore, if you are in a situation like this, do you go, going back to the alternatives game and negotiation, do you go into that alternatives game the way Pashinyan has done? I'd say no, too risky. Too risky, because if Russia turns not the Titanic that you are trying to jump into the water and swim away to a safer place or a boat, safe boat, what if it is not? What if Russia becomes the regional hegemon? Then it will be even more difficult for you to gain more, because Russians, and we know it from their behavior, and not just now, but their behavior, they will do whatever is going to be in their interest at our expense. And then for generations, we can blame, we can say it was Russians, it was Turks, it was Europeans who didn't come. Whatever we're going to be saying is going to be irrelevant, because what's relevant now is thinking about how do we get to consolidated purposeful mobilization so that we can stay out of the nasty scenarios where we're going to lose our statehood. I will stop here, understanding that there may be more questions and it will be probably lively, and I'm used to interactive and dialogue rather than lecturing. So I'm welcoming any questions, and I hope we'll have a very fruitful two-way conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martirosyan. We can, folks. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and I will offer the questions to Mr. Martirosyan. But to touch upon, like, starting from the beginning of this discussion, could you talk about? You mentioned this. Could you talk a little bit about the psychological state of the Mr. Pashinyan's mind? You know, parallels with Mr. Saakashvili abound to the untrained eye. What is your assessment?
Well, I think we're dealing with two different Pashinyans, one before the war and one after the war. And before the war, the way he was dealing with the future and uncertainty was much calmer. Why it was calmer? Because he even could see changing of power, kind of, I've done what I've done, I'll stay one term, maybe two terms, and I'm gonna be gone. That's not a life-threatening situation for him. After the war, I think from one hand side, losing power is almost a paranoid situation for him. Hence, his putting so much into the security and police in Armenia. And then there was a point where he became much more sedate. I don't know if it's on medication, or he became much more sedate. But I have another explanation, not just pharmacological. I mean, he became much more sedate because he could see that he, as a player, if he continues the line that he's chosen, and the line that he's chosen is essentially solving this intractable conflict with Azeris and Turks by conceding to them whatever they want, and then that would be the price for peace with them. And that line is very much in the interest of both of the West and of Russia. For different reasons, they want him to be doing that. And if he's doing that, he's satisfying the external players who would support him in power, because he's doing what nobody else probably would do it for them. But his only concern is the internal one. The internal one, and I'm always speaking about the negotiator as the one who needs to do it on two tracks, right? You negotiate outside, but you also need to negotiate internally. Internally, he has more problems. He has more problems because he understands that this shift, paradigmatic shift of the identity that he's proposing, because a way out of the intractable conflict is either a capitulation, when you sign a capitulation and the other side imposes on you its will, as it was with Germany after World War II, or you redefine your identity. And that's what he is choosing to do. Well, there was defeat in Artsakh, but he's also going for the redefining. And that may be less acceptable to Armenians, not only just in Armenia, but worldwide. And we saw what happened to his motorcade or carcade in New York, right? And what people were shouting. He did keep that in memory, because there were consequences for at least some of the people involved in that. So he knows that's a danger, and therefore his grip on power is gonna be he's not gonna be willing to yield it. It's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for anyone negotiating with him to find a golden bridge by which he's going to cross and say, yes, I'm ready to resign now. So that's my reading. I can go more into the psychological stuff, but I think that may be less important right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The efforts of the current regime has been to try to play a game of confusion with all parties, which we have seen as sort of backfire spectacularly. What do you make of this?
Well, this is, again, I mean, as I started to talk about Pashinyan in the very beginning, I think in one of my interviews fairly early in 2019, kind of observing him doing that, I metaphorically compared him with, there is Armenian fairy tale too about that, and the Russian one is The Russian one is about this round thing that grandfather and grandfather make from dough, right? So it's kind of a round thing that starts rolling and meets different animals on its way, runs away from the bear, wolf, hare, fox, and then eventually ends up again at the table of grandfather and grand. So metaphorically for me, he was resembling that. It's not like, I mean, he wants to be with Russians or with the West. He wants to be with the ones who give him what he needs. And for him, what he needs, first and foremost, are defined in his political agenda, which is power, staying in power, holding the grip on the power in Armenia. And I don't buy a second all the talk about democracy and whatnot. Next elections, they still gonna be the ones who will try to get reelected by any means they want. Otherwise, coming to power in 2018, the first thing they would have done would be changing the constitution and the constitutional framework. That would allow a different participatory process of election and forming the government. But then clinging to what was created by Serge Sarkisyan for him. And it was specifically created to make change of power very difficult. So in some ways, I think he is the one who's trying to manipulate and plan, run away from these guys, from that guys. But it's, as we can see in Artsakh right now, and I mentioned that, these players may be punishing. And when I say punishing, they're punishing the people of Armenia. And I'm often, and when I talk to some of the Russians, I'm saying, oh, this is short-sighted on your side, because the Armenian people are not like the Chechens. You destroy the region, but then you rebuild it, and now they are your most loyal kind of supporters. Nor Armenians are like Georgians. This is not going to be easily forgiven, right? I mean, what you are doing with Artsakh. And for Russians, unfortunately, they're thinking, wait until this is all over. We want Armenian people to put pressure on Pashinyan not to engage with the West. But Pashinyan is has almost immunity. He couldn't care less what happens to the people of Artsakh, because he and his regime, they have washed their hands. He's specifically saying that. And he's talking about Artsakh, and I don't know what's now in the proposal that went to Baku, the peace proposal, but we know what Baku demanded. And it would be very silly to assume that Baku now has agreed to less than what they were demanding in their 5 points that they published. So what's going to happen? What kind of a peace deal he's getting? A peace deal where Artsakh is going to be part of Azerbaijan. He recognizes it openly in a bilateral treaty, bilateral agreement. Is that the price that he's willing to pay? Will Turks and Azeris stop at that? Maybe. And going back to our scenarios, when I'm talking about scenario Armenistan, vilayet Armenistan, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. Batumi didn't happen overnight. Georgians were very happy in the beginning. Investments, the cheese will be even sweet in that mousetrap in the beginning. So that's the real danger, right? I mean, you're kind of taking the nation to a place that is going to be for generations, it's going to be very difficult to repair or to get back to where a nation state was real. A state that could be strong, stand on its feet, yes, have major differences or even adversarial relations with the two neighbors, but capable of staying on its feet. And that's the tragedy. That's the tragedy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question we have is, we have the multimodal north-south and east-west axis that crosses Armenia and vying for supremacy and resources. Can you expand upon this option a bit more and how it affects Armenia and Artsakh? Well, obviously beyond what we have seen already.
Yes, obviously there is that promise the Silk Road, and now Ara Nazarian, I think the other day, signing some kind of agreement or reaching an agreement, understanding that ANI would be jointly revived, and they were talking about the Silk Road. Yes, the roads, it's crossroads. It's there are ways to benefit from that positioning. But I would say right now that we have a very challenged world order, and when we have a confrontation of the scale, which is I think it pales the Cold War right now. I mean, it's a very dangerous development, and the world order is probably better described as a disorder. And we have this very stiff competition of China, Russia, and Iran. So we could see that the Iranian leader was in Beijing the other day, and they signed $400 billion investment from China going to Iran for their oil and energy supplies. So I'm mentioning that because it's not, I mean, if it were a perfect world where there would be more cooperation, obviously the complementarity of Oskanya before 2008 would be an excellent option for Armenia. You can benefit from both worlds. But we're getting now to a point where this competition is not going to even end with Russia West. There is another one looming, or it's already maybe palpable to some. It's China, US, China West. So how this whole thing is going to play out when you have some of these players under sanctions and some of the restrictions that would make this vision of a region where we almost do not care what you big guys are doing out there. We are here. Yes, again, I think going to one of my scenarios where I was talking about Armenia as a Finland, if we are consolidated and mobilized, and if Russia, for instance, wins, or we can do that even with the West. I mean, not only values democracy, but because the confrontation between them is going to continue, there is going to be a way for Armenia to carve or negotiate a place that can be a place where they meet, just like in Finland in the Cold War. That history is less known, but it was in Finland that many things that were not in open public eye diplomatically through different channels were essentially negotiated by Moscow and the West. So we could play, but I don't believe that it's going to be this kind of promise that Pashinyan is often talking about, right? So we're going to now make a deal with the Turks, and yes, the price will be Artsakh, but then the rest of Armenia is going to stay intact. And then we're going to gain, we're going to benefit from this huge potential of trade and cooperation in the region. It would be possible if, again, there were a world order. We are in a world disorder. How long it's going to take? I don't know. I would say I don't see it over even with the end of the war in Ukraine. It will still continue for some time until we get to some new Yalta or Potsdam or whatever it's going to be that will make, again, the rules and the international law work for all and make everybody more or less equal before that law. No exceptions, no players above the international law. And as we are speaking, I think today the Russian Duma, the parliament, they completely resigned their obligations with the European Court of Human Rights. So forget about that page. And they're willing to get out of any international agreements that are not in the interests of Russia. Does it remind anyone? Yes, I mean, in some ways, the US never gets into international regimes if that regime is not in the interest of the US. The US never went into the Rome statute on the war crimes and so forth. I mean, this is a very dangerous place we're in. And that's exactly why I repeat saying, don't run in front of the train. It's very dangerous to be doing that. We may end up with choices that will probably be no better than what we had in 1920.
Yep.
And that's really dangerous.
Sounds like a sage advice. You mentioned the words inexperienced and incompetent regarding Pashinyan's actions. If the number one priority of Pashinyan is just to open the border with Turkey, aren't his actions intentional? And on this front, what do we make of the opening of the Turkey land border after 30 years, which you just touched upon?
Well, I think, again, we don't know. I mean, I don't think Turks are gonna revise their position, which is, hey, Armenia, first get a deal with Azerbaijan. And if Azerbaijan says it's satisfied with the deal, then on Artsakh, or not only Artsakh now, but on the corridor. And then we'll talk about opening. They may make some symbolic small gestures. They may, nobody could predict, right? I mean, that there'd be an earthquake. And there may be another one coming for Istanbul. At least some are saying that it's possible. Will it change things in the thinking of Turks about this whole situation? May or may not. I think it will depend on how much Pashinyan is ready to concede. And we'll only see that when it becomes a fact. He obviously will try to put, to frame it differently as a gain rather than a loss. So we saved Armenia. If we continued with Artsakh, we could have lost everything. So I saved you, Armenia. He's very good at manipulative. It's not even framing. It's a kind of a spinning, right? As he was saying, the war, I mean, I saved more people by signing that capitulation. And when I'm saying capitulation, he gave to Azeris more than we lost on the battlefield, right? Because Kelbajar or Karabachar, Berdzor were not taken by Azeri military. So I don't know where he's going to stop. And now he's speaking about 29,800 square kilometers as a sacred kind of this is the red line. But that red line has already been trampled. Azeris and have taken more land. They're 4 kilometers now from Jermuk. I was there. I saw where the enemy was. So if they're there, I mean, what are you talking about? Where is this? Where are you going to say, I'm going to fight for this? And again, from the negotiators' perspective, the worst thing that he has done is publicly stating that we don't have an alternative. You can go to, it's a negotiation 101. Even if you're negotiating with your family, which may be even more difficult sometimes than international negotiations. You tell them you don't have an alternative, you have to agree what's on the table. Now this is on the table. Now this is on the table for you because you are saying you don't have an alternative. When Azeris and Turks might go after their desired solution of the problem, whenever there is an opportunity. Until then, they can play, you gave us Artsakh, we're stopping here, we have the corridor, and now we don't have any designs on your territory anymore. And that will be until the next big opportunity. When is the big opportunity? When the West and they deal with Russia again, as in September 27 of 2020. The minute they have the opportunity, they're going to do that. If you don't have the alternative. If you don't have the alternative, you are weak. How can you improve your alternatives? One is get consolidated, mobilized nation. And when I say nation, it's not just citizens who were born in Armenia or hold Armenian passport. It's the entire Armenian nation that transcends the borders of the Republic of Armenia. It's Artsakh, it's the Spurk. If we cannot do that, then I don't know what are the sources of power for you. Where are you going to gain the alternative? Turks probably are going to see some benefits even if the border opens for trade with Armenia because they have the experience of Batumi, right? George and Batumi. That there are other ways they can quote unquote colonize this. And Azeris are already talking about the population that is willing to come to live in not just Varsenis and Sunik, but also in Ararat. Why not? And in Yerevan itself, right? As the Artsakh representative to Armenia once told me, several ones before, told me the building that they are in right now in Yerevan was once Azeri Theater of Yerevan. And Azeris jokingly were saying that we're gonna come, our viewers are gonna come to that theater one day. It means that they haven't given up, and nobody in the international community, so-called, international organizations, had once said, what are you talking about, Aliyev, when you talk about your designs on the Armenian sovereign territory? Not once. Are they doing it behind closed doors? Are the diplomats in Baku? I don't believe that. Because had they been doing that, we wouldn't see him repeat over and over again. That's their goal. They're going to work toward that goal. And it's our choice. We just can make it much easier for them to achieve that goal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martirosyan. Next question. We have a number of questions, actually. Can you delve a bit into the Ukraine effect on the crisis facing Armenia?
Yes. Well, as I said, there are many pundits, many in the US probably, that believe that Russia is doomed, Russia has lost. But I also hear the same kind of verdicts in Yerevan from some of the pundits. Some people who have never seen what is Bakhmut, right? Can any military easily take Bakhmut? Yes, if you obliterate it entirely. Obliterate it entirely. And Russians may end up doing that, and not just in Bakhmut, but in all other places. And here is the dilemma for the Russians in doing that. The more they do that, the more they understand that sooner or later they are going to be the ones, even if they win, right? It's almost like we cannot win and have it too, right? Because when you win and you have destroyed all of it, who's going to be restoring the place? What is going to be? So as I said, I mean, for me, Ukraine, I'd say it's going to quickly turn into a war of attrition. And the way I read the Russian strategy right now is minimize losses, inflict as many losses on the Ukrainian military right now. Territory doesn't matter. What matters is what damage you do to the military machine, to the most capable ones. Because teaching quickly how to operate Abrams or Leopard is not an easy thing, right? You can teach them, but they're not going to be as good as someone who already perished and was doing that for 10, 15 years, experienced in battlefield. So sooner or later, it's going to be also a competition of resources. And right now, Ukraine is totally dependent on what they get from the West. Therefore, the attrition and the calculus of Moscow is that the conflict is not just with Ukraine, it's with the West. So their intention is to defeat the West in Ukraine. Otherwise, they could have destroyed all the bridges across the Dnieper River, 6 of them, and not allow that the supplies reach the Ukrainian army on this bank of the river. They're not doing that. Why not? Because they want the picture of a burning Leopard or Abrams tank is going to be more important for them than anything else in this game. And they're going to take it there. Moreover, as the US and other European countries are going to go into elections, their electorates are going to be asking the questions, where are you sending billions and billions of dollars, if they are not already asking the question, and some are. So that questioning will be, as the war protracts, is going to be more. So my take is, Russia militarily may win. Will Russia win the peace? I don't know. I have my own doubts. What kind of Russia it's going to be after they win, and what kind of Russia we're going to have after Putin, because he's 70, I don't know how long he's going to stay in power, but there's going to be this mess of transition. Russia is a very kind of uncertain player in many ways in this game. So, but still, I would not, again, right now, put my bets on the West winning in this war. I would not.
Okay. Thank you. Touching on the circulating maps that you alluded to earlier on, Azerbaijan is circulating maps of Western Azerbaijan, that is Iran, Southern Azerbaijan, that is parts of, that is Armenia, sorry, Southern Azerbaijan, that is parts of Iran, and most recently claiming Georgia as Azeri territory. What do you make of these statements? Are these mostly for internal consumptions, or are these signals?
Well, I've been saying this for a long time. This is the Azerbaijani statehood birth defect. What I mean by that, it was created by Pan-Turkists, and even the name Azerbaijan was not the one that the Azeri intellectuals of the time decided on. It was coming from the Turks, with an eye on southern Azerbaijan, right, Antropatena. So they thought that they may use that as a claim for the divided nation, and that discourse is alive. It has been kept alive, not just by Azerbaijanis, but some outside players who've been interested in that. So if you have southern Azerbaijan, it's obvious that you need to have west, north. The only Azerbaijan that you don't have is east, because east of Azerbaijan is the Caspian Sea and other Turkic states and nations. So as Azerbaijan is getting more and more confident in the region, and Turks are getting more and more confident, they now openly talking about their territorial claims, not only Armenia, but Georgia. Did Georgians know this may happen? They only had one open territorial dispute with Azerbaijan. That's the David Gareji Monastery, right on the border. Right. Other than that, it seemed like it's a continuous honeymoon, except Batumi, which is now more and more populated by Turks and started as a great story of investment and Saakashvili success. And now Georgians are seeing what really happened, and they are not able to fix that. They cannot change that. Do they have other claims? Of course they do, because there is an Azeri populated area, and they can find in history times when there was a small khanate, or rather, it was called sultanate at the time. It doesn't really matter. And say, yes, we have our population here, and that population wants more autonomy, more rights in Georgia. Well, what can I say? I mean, Georgians will be reaping the harvest. I mean, they sowed it. I mean, because they took Armenians as a much less friendly nation. I'm talking about the attitude, general attitudes, because they had a fear of Java, that Armenians sooner or later are going to start a secession in Java. Then Azeris. Azeris were very friendly. They were there. And now the country, some jokingly are calling not Sakartvelo, that's the name of the country, as someone who grew up in Georgia, I know, Sakartvelo. They call it Sokartvelo. Sokar is the Azeri oil and gas company, right? So Sokartvelo, because Sokar owns a lot in that country. Very difficult to say no when your alternatives are very poor, and there are these sensitivities and vulnerabilities that have been created by Turks and Azeris.
Yeah,
and I think we need to learn from the lessons. We need to learn from Georgians, at least. We cannot learn from our own lessons.
Yeah, I mean, these are important issues, and you touch on the concept of the sort of the inferiority complex of Azerbaijan with their nation, because there's videos of the senior Aliyev who discusses in an inner circle that, you know, that they really didn't have. They were considered themselves mountain Turks. They have a variety of names that were calling themselves, and the Azerbaijan sort of was a product of Turkish influence and Musavat party over there, that they came with this concept. So these are all points that we seem to have not learned and not paid attention as a nation, and looking at their ambitions. And following on these same discussions, we just alluded to, we've seen the scenario played out in Georgia. There were the Western values that were embraced there. The police got their new uniforms, the new cars. The bribes were curtailed. And in essence, Georgia is no better off today than it was before when it comes to corruption and the entrenched system that is operating in this place. And then look at their leadership, and you can see like one oligarch is supporting versus the other and whatnot. And we saw exactly what has happened with Batumi in many places, that actually Turkish Airlines considers Georgian cities as domestic flight destinations. So you walk into, Batumi, you will see Turkish names in all the restaurants. They've really come out there and sort of laid eggs. And the question is now, what would it take for our people to see this and to internalize this and to realize what's about to happen to them if they don't play their cards well?
This is even a bigger question than the first one that we have in the title of this conversation. I think there is this apathy, and in part it can be explained by the outcome of the war. But I think it has deeper roots, because there is the kind of disappointment in all previous governments that never delivered what they promised and what they came to with their programs and platforms, whatever they had. So there is this kind of disenchantment with the I think the latest surveys, and one that I participated in conducting in May 21, is the biggest question. I mean, when you're trying to understand this kind of condition, right, is to look into what has happened, what shifts have happened in the value system. And unless you understand what's happened with values in the last 30 years, you're not going to be able to change this. And I think the most important shift, and it's been global. I mean, it's not like Armenia has been separate or exception. But I still believe that with the right leadership, there could have been a good balance found. And what happened, we have the value of material well-being, instant gratification, conspicuous consumption. These are the things that are kind of hidden but shared by many values in Armenia today. It's important how my family survives. And with that mindset, it's very difficult to look into the common good. And without the common good, it's very difficult to sustain a nation state, because all European nation states came into being when the leadership, where the population or the majority of the population believed that the nation state was an answer to the dilemma of preserving the identity. I still believe it is. I mean, I don't believe that you can keep the Armenian nation. And when we say Armenian nation, sometimes the Armenian word azg, which means ethnic group and nation simultaneously. I mean, the nation for me is a political nation, a state, where every Armenian has the laws that he voted for, he supported, and everybody is equal before those laws. There's a kind of the French, or even before the French, the Dutch Republican model of a nation state. In part, the answer to that question is that when I talk to some of my Dutch friends now, and I'm asking them, imagine that the 80-year war that for independence from Habsburgs that the Netherlands was involved in the 17th century were happening now. Do you think the Dutch population today has a stomach to engage in some kind of enterprise like that? Unanimously, the answer is no. These are not the people who in the 18th century fought for their freedom, for their own country for their own political nations. And we, in 91, I think, had a very important choice to make, which way we want to go. We want to go and become, I'm not saying, I don't like these parallels. I know Israel, I think, well enough, have done work there to say that there is a parallel between Armenia and Israel, but it's sort of a nation state that has its own values, sticks to those values, and is ready to defend itself, right? In the sea of adversity, whatever it is there. In 94, the decision was made, no, we need to become just a normal state. Nationalism as ideology is a dead category. I think I'm quoting Levon Petersburg here. Now, if nationalism were a dead category, none of the European nation states would have existed. Yes, Europe has evolved to a union where the very concept of sovereignty, the new sovereignty and nation state is different, and it's negotiated differently, and they're past their wars and whatnot. But in our region, where we are, if we want a nation state, we cannot behave like Slovakia or Latvia. We have to understand that the choice is to, again, and that would require a different leadership, different mentality. Do we have that? I don't know. My answer right now is I don't see one. I see Pashinyan, who is taking the nation in a very different direction. Hoping, maybe he is honest. I don't buy, by the way, conspiracy theories that he is on the payroll of kind of intelligence services of different states. Unless I see the proof, I mean, that's me. I don't buy into those things. I think he's an opportunist, and if this works for him and a group of Armenian Novorish, the oligarchs, who can see benefits that they can reap from the opening to Turkey, they already have plans about construction in Yerevan, hotels and whatnot, just on par with Batumi. If that's going to prevail, and if we're not going to be able to change the in the values, I'm not saying being materialist is bad, but if you're only materialist, if you don't have any ideals, if you don't have a balancing act here, you are doomed. You're not going to be able to keep the nation state in that environment. Because every Armenian who believes that it's about their survival in materialism will be asking the question, why should I stay here? Why should my kids stay here? If it's about materialism, there are so many different places where they can be superachievers. If I can not leave, then at least I will make everything possible to allow my kids to live. And therefore, Armenia already is turning into not a state, but territory. I call it, quote unquote, territory 29,800. It's not nation state. It's not republic where you have this separation of powers. It's an autocratic state, increasingly so, and will be even worse as the country moves in the direction chosen by Pashinyan and his team, because internal cleavages will become even more cross-cutting, even more difficult to sustain internally when you have that kind of disagreement about the vision for the future of that place. Exodus, yes, and also influx of many more Turks.
So many of the current regime's policies have the Petersburg fingerprints on them, especially the concept of the nation state and nationalism, which Mr. Petersburg was so allergic to, as you alluded. Where do you think Pashinyan has diverged from his former mentor?
Well, I think better than myself. I mean, that answer has been given by Zurabian, is the spokesman of Levon Petersburg, and he's occasionally, unlike his political boss, he's more frequently on television giving interviews. And I think for Levon Ter-Petrosyan and his circle, Pashinyan was more of a kind of lesser educated, lesser capable, but the one who's kind of jumping ahead of everyone, right? I mean, it's the kind of, because Ter-Petrosyan, although he cut a deal for him, essentially, when he was imprisoned after 2008. It was Levon Ter-Petrosyan who cut a deal with Serge to get amnesty for Pashinyan. I'm not going to go into the details of their dealings, but essentially, I think Ter-Petrosyan and his coterie expected more deferential attitude from their student, right, or someone who was nurtured by that political party. And they could see that he's taking some of their biggest complaint was he's taking some of my concepts and then he ruins it. As he goes, he ruins it. He takes the concept of trading territory for peace, and then goes with it, and he totally ruins that that stuff. So that's been their complaints. I mean, I think it's fair to say that many Armenians were not paying that much of an attention to who really Pashinyan was before 2018. How he resurfaced in Armenian politics. Was it just because the government of Armenia that controlled so much in terms of electoral chances of Pashinyan and others, they just were lenient enough to let him become a parliamentarian? Or there were other games that they were playing? Because Pashinyan, if you go back in time and read his articles, he was the first one of Armenian journalists, I may be mistaken, but I think he was the first Armenian journalist to call the lands around Artsakh occupied territories. He was the one who was writing articles saying that I paid a minute of silence tribute alone to all Azeris who died in January 1990 during the onslaught of the Soviet army. He didn't say he was paying tribute to Armenians who were killed in pogroms. He's a kind of someone with that kind of mentality. I mean, and I think part of that thinking was becoming more and more widespread among young Armenians. And Ter-Petrosyan's question, well, it was not, it was a rhetoric question when he was saying, Sergo Jan, lavches aprelu michev Artsakhi hartse chlutzvi, meaning, Sergo Jan, you won't live well until Artsakh problem is solved, was the kind of an issue that became widespread, a meme. There are different reasons why it became so widespread in many Armenians in Armenia, why there was so much anti-Karabakh sentiment, and still is probably in Armenia, and how it was generated and sustained in 25 years. But back to your previous question, I think for Ter-Petrosyan, it was important to make this comeback, right? To stay in the history of the Armenian nation, that in 98, he was right, he proved everybody wrong, and he came and he essentially delivered what he had in his mind, made the deal with Azeris on Lavrov's plan, essentially, right? Giving some of the territory and concluding peace. And they now repeat that stuff. They say that it was a huge missed opportunity in 98, how stupid it was to reject Ter-Petrosyan's proposal, as if it was the lay people who rejected it. It was his own entourage. He and Liparityan were not able to persuade their own entourage that that's the right thing to do. It speaks so much about their leadership, right? So, and the other piece is that I don't like the subjunctive mood when it comes to history. Hey, you're talking about what would have happened in 98. And why do you believe that in 98, had you given the territory, the buffer to Azerbaijan, they would immediately say that they are forgetting about Karabakh. Karabakh is no longer part of their strategic thinking about the region. Why do you think that would have happened? But I think we are constantly drawn into these discourses, and they're distracting, and I think even further fragmenting the nation. We need leadership that would come with a vision that would unite and mobilize the nation. Again, I'm talking about sufficient consensus, because there will be always people who would be saying, yes, deal with Turkey at any expense. I mean, we're ready to make any concessions just to get the peace with Turkey. Yes, I mean, you may get it, but as I keep repeating, this is a meme from my teacher, Roger Fisher. Peace is not a piece of paper. Is there peace in Colombia? 50 years of civil war and losses, and then Santos coming in, 4 years of negotiating the Havana process and pulling out an agreement with FARC and making it even acceptable for the Colombian nation and getting the Nobel Prize for it. Is it a success story? Yes, most people would say yes, but only the ones who don't know many details of right now. Because in that deal, 42 billion US dollars were to be spent until the year 2031. How much has been spent to the date? 15%. In other words, the deal that was signed, it's not final. There is no such thing as a final deal. It's fluid, it's changing. And the only way for you to sustain your existence in that region is to have a very strong deterrence capability. And that's not just military. That's diplomatic, that's political, coalitional, you name it. I mean, there are so many different aspects. But unless you build that deterrence for your statehood, which requires also the common good to be respected by all, you're not going to be able to survive. I don't believe that's possible.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question: is Pashinyan actively courting Turkey over Russia?
I think he may believe, or at least some people close to him believe, that Russia is not going to win in Ukraine. And if that's the case, then they need to think about the alternative game. Isn't it interesting that the minute Ara Nazarian landed in Ankara, the very first to tweet and commend the act of diplomacy were the French and the West? I mean, because in their strategy, Armenia closing the history page with Turks, resolving the Artsakh problem on terms pushed forward by Azerbaijan, is the way Armenia is going to solve its security dilemma, therefore become even less dependent from Russia. And if that happens, then it will be a matter of just choosing on which day to say, thank you, Russia, you out. So do Russians understand that? Yes, they understand, but they also understand how tricky the whole Turkey game that they have is right now. They've invested so much in Turkey. They need Turkey as kind of a place where they have this gray zone of loopholes with the sanctions regime against them. They have so many other things, that the hub, the energy, that the gas and oil that they're going to be pumping through Turkey as Turkish oil, right? Because oil has been found recently in Turkey. Found, yes. And there is the gas. So they have many commercial and other things that are going there. And there is even bigger uncertainty now about what's going to happen on May 15th. Is Erdogan going to stay in power, or this earthquake, tragic as it is for the human beings, Kurds mostly, right, or whoever, I mean, it doesn't matter, it may be problematic now for him to get reelected, right? Because of the anger and the whole story of the construction, improper codes, construction codes, and whatnot. So politically, very seesawing. And if he's not going to be elected, is Russia going to get a partner who would continue with them playing the game, or that Turkey will be more a Western ally? These are big questions. I don't have the answer, but what Pashinyan is doing right now is he going in the direction of Turkey, at the same time kind of putting probably his bets on Russia on its way out anyway. But what if Russia is not? And Russia sees that you are now, just as Georgia was getting close to Turkey, that was pro-Western, right? And got punished for that by Russians. I mean, I would not rule out anything in that game, because Russians would say, we're going to go after our interests. If it's going to be about giving more Armenian territory or doing it at the Armenian expense, so be it. We don't care. It's like, I don't know, this is an interesting kind of story parable, but I've been told it's real. In Yalta, when Churchill was negotiating with Stalin about Poland, and Stalin was saying, no, Poland is going to stay in our sphere of influence. Churchill, with many arguments and evidence, was saying, but Poles don't like you guys. You know, it's not going to be a good relationship. Why do you want to be in Poland? You know what Stalin's response was? It speaks a lot about the Russian mentality. Stalin told him, do you have a dog? He said, no. I mean, I had a dog. Now it's a cat, whatever. No, why? He said, can you make your dog lick its tail? No, cats do. Dogs don't lick their tail. Said, but can you do that? How would you do that? Can you force a dog to lick its tail, constantly lick its tail? I don't know. What's the answer? Says, you cut it and you put mustard on it, and the dog will be licking it. So when it comes to the Russian ruthless imperial approaches to advancing their interests against adversaries in the existential fight, don't be surprised if this time we again are putting our, almost like putting our head in wolves' mouth, that's Turks, and saying, oh, no, this time it's not going to bite. It's different Turkey. They're now different. And at the same time, don't forget that you have Russians who are not forgetting what have you been doing, what games you've been playing. I mean, I don't know. I started with that premise that it's a very dangerous game, and I continue to insist that it's a very risky game. I would not recommend playing it quite that way.
You're absolutely right. And it's clear that Mr. Pashinyan is calling the shots on all internal and external matters of importance in Armenia. And obviously, he's named an English teacher to the post of the U.S. ambassador. We have a former seminary student and a teacher as our foreign minister, and now an experienced 29-year-old on the post of the deputy foreign minister. So we obviously, the runt of the litter is currently in charge in Armenia. Where does he reach for advice and guidance, given that, or does he need one?
He only listens to what he wants to hear. And those who are advising him know that. I was once asked to advise his party's parliamentarians. And after having a conversation with them, I decided that it's not worth my time and probably reputation. So I don't want to be giving advice to someone who's not only going to reject it, but say that it's not going to work. The world is very different. But he's also listening to some people. Again, he's listening to people who are telling him what fits his worldview, right? People from various ivory towers advancing nonsense theories about democratic peace, right? And a very simple iteration of that theory Armenia is democracy, Georgia is democracy, and sooner or later, this is kind of the neoconservative, neoliberal kind of take on things. Sooner or later, Azerbaijan is going to be a democracy, Turkey is going to be democracy, everybody is going to be democracy, and democracies do not fight with each other. I mean, yes, I can see you smile. I mean, at least I see your face, not other faces. It's a very dangerous concept.
Can you comment on the influence of Israel to the U.S. position on Armenia Artsakh with their increasing financial relationships with the Turks and Azeris? Or is Israel supporting the Turks and the Azeris at the direction of the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was shown one of the recent public statements. I've never heard anything quite so anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic as Erdogan very recently, before the earthquake, addressing his own parliament on Israel. I mean, I really recommend, find that. He essentially says that Israel is fascist, racist, and so on. I mean, that's and yet Israel needs Turkey, and Israelis are very pragmatic when they go after their interests. What's more important for them? Yes, value like Armenia may be closer to them. I mean, there are so many personal, probably contacts, relationships, but there are also Azeri Jews, right? The Tats, the others who have a community in Israel. And when they put on the scales, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and the region, they look after their own interests. And their primary interest is Iran. They need staging ground for their attacks on Iran, if it gets down to that. They need Azerbaijan for an internal implosion strategy they may look into, with playing that irredentist game of southern Azerbaijan. Right? They need Azerbaijan for spying on Iran. There are so many different areas where they're gaining from the relation with Azerbaijan. I'm not even mentioning now the purchase of weaponry, because many are very quick to point out the sales of Russian weaponry to Azerbaijan, which was the same almost. We were getting even more advanced than what Azerbaijan was getting from Russia. But the most critical one that was decisive in the war, they were getting from, not from Russia, but from Israel and Turkey. Well, more from Israel, by the way. So the question is, can we change that? Is it possible? Should we try? And if Israeli interests are framed that way, it's obvious that the State Department, no matter how much pressure from Congress, is going to look into the interests from a different lens and perspective, right? Here is our closest ally. It has this interest in Azerbaijan, and here is Armenia. Yes, these noisy Armenian lobbyists and whatnot. Okay, we'll be saying something, but nothing. I mean, because if the American diplomacy, the French diplomacy, wanted really to stop the blockade, or they're sending observer mission or monitoring mission to Armenia, as if they don't know what happened on September 13 of last year. They know exactly what happened. But they could have sent, right, not from Armenia to Shushi, but from Azerbaijan. Let them travel with journalist crews, let them investigate, let them make the story. I mean, here is the autocratic, most corrupt in the region regime of hereditary sultanate of Azerbaijan, repressing freedom-loving, democratic Armenians of Artsakh. Do they do that? No, of course not. Of course not. Because, and I'm not going to go into the conspiracy that it's because of Israel. No, but because editorial boards and everybody, they know, they get their cues and they're informed of what's the better way to cover and to give a story to their own audiences. And that's how it's happened. That's how the media works right now. I don't believe the mainstream media is really independent in its coverage anymore. That's probably 80s or 70s. maybe early 90s, I don't know. It's not happening that way. So yes, Israel is very important. And Azeris were very quick to grasp that idea. They didn't repeat the same mistake that Elchibey made. You know, after Armenians took Karabachar, on that day, I'm sorry. It was earlier than that. I'm sorry. It was probably Lachin. On the same day, the Azeri Foreign Affairs Ministry appealed to Iran and to Israel on the same day. They were uncouth, they were inexperienced, they were making mistakes then. Not anymore. And to understand why not anymore, you can get a sense from their diplomatic academy. They invested millions of dollars to develop that academy in Baku, to bring the best to teach their diplomats on how to do that and not to repeat the same mistakes. Is there a diplomatic academy in Yerevan? Yes, there is. It's smaller than my bedroom. And even if there are Armenians in diaspora who are willing to come and do pro bono work, it's not happening. It's not happening. In part because he's the one calling all the shots. I mean, Foreign Affairs Ministry is just a pro forma. It's a protocol. It's just implementing agency. It's not the one that conceptualizes foreign policy. It's been that way even before Pashinyan, but it's even more so under him right now.
Thank you. How would the upcoming Turkey elections in May affect the dynamics? Does Aliyev have a short runway to achieve his goals before Erdogan leaves office if he loses the elections?
Aliyev is trapped. I mean, he's bluffing. He's not bluffing in terms of the blockade of Artsakh. He has many more instruments at his hands. It's not just the road, it's everything. I mean, we know now. When I was talking about that in 2020, that they control gas, they control electricity, they control internet, they control everything, and the roads. And when last May, I was running scenarios planning, and one of the scenarios, by the way, with the officials from Artsakh, was about the road blockade. Instead of spending more time thinking on what we need to do now urgently, that's kind of, you have 6 months, right? 6 months to prepare. It may happen. Now, in retrospect, 6 months. May have been less than that. But instead of prioritizing that, they're prioritizing other things. But that's a different story. I'm not going to go into that. Now, the question is Aliyev, why I'm saying Aliyev is bluffing. He's bluffing around the corridor and establishing it by force. He cannot do it right now, not because of the earthquake in Turkey, but because others need stability. Russians don't want a second front. Well, the West would probably love a second front, but more than a second front, they want the natural gas and oil. So it's not in the interest of these players, not because he wouldn't do it. I mean, if these interests were not at play, I think he may have tried. But he knows that he's going to be getting snap on his knuckles if he tries to do that, because that's not in the interest of bigger players. And he's very good at understanding where is the opportunity. He saw that opportunity in September, US going into elections. So it's a kind of an opportunity, right? A window. And that I don't see that window right now. That's why he's bluffing. He's not going to do that right now. I don't believe, for instance, that he's going to do that. And yes, when Pashinyan is saying that the EU observers have arrived in Armenia because they want to make sure that Armenia and Russia are not going to attack Azerbaijan. What do you understand? I mean, this is also a part of the a negotiator's job, right? I mean, kind of dissect, understand the semantics of it, right? So who's saying this? Is it Azeris telling Europeans that there is that kind of a danger? Is this Pashinyan inventing that they're saying that? Have they really come to observe what's happening on that border to make sure that Russia and Armenia are not going to attack? If so, if it's coming from you, let's assume it's coming from Europeans for a second. If it's coming from Europeans, then it logically means that that's the scenario they want to avoid. And if that's the scenario that they want to avoid, the question is why? Because they have interests. And as a negotiation expert, I need to be very good at analyzing interests and then understanding how to work with different interests. It's the art of negotiations, how to work with them. I'm not going to go, obviously, in this format into what and how you could make use of that. But it's really mind-boggling, right? That Baku could be appealing to Europeans and telling them that there is an imminent danger of the Armenian attack on Azerbaijan. And then Russians saying that Baku has never, ever publicly stated anything like that.
Yep, very interesting. Could you expand on the abstract notion of consolidated mobilization? What does it mean in practical terms?
Yes.
Context of Armenian survival.
A very good question. I mean, yes, terminology is important. I mean, if I'm saying consolidated mobilization, people may be asking, so what the hell does it mean? How is it different from other mobilization? Consolidated mobilization is different from, and I have it on that slide, you can see I have ad hoc mobilization. Ad hoc mobilization, when people mobilize around certain issue. Okay, we mobilize for reopening the road against the blockade, and then it fizzes and it disappears. Okay, we achieved the goal, the road was reopened, 3 months later it's again closed, and so on. Consolidated mobilization means that there is a bigger vision that allows more protracted mobilization to achieve those goals. It's not just ad hoc. Right now, we need to solve this problem, and we're ready to mobilize for that. The other piece, important element of consolidated mobilization, implies that it's based on a consensus, an agreement of all. Because I can see easily now how, I mean, I don't know, maybe you need to talk to Armenian lobbyists, but I can easily see how Armenian lobbyists more successful talking to Congress than to State Department. Why? Because if you go with that message to State Department, they can say, you diasporans are acting like a spoiler. Because the government in Yerevan is engaged in a very constructive negotiation with Turkey. You are now trying to throw a monkey wrench into this. Think about those consequences. Let them negotiate. Let them deal with this, right? And I think that's what I mean. I mean, trying to be more practical about what that means. That means that the government in Yerevan, diasporan organizations, and the entire nation speaks with one voice. That's consolidated mobilization.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions. In the 1730s, the king of Iran, Nader Shah, recognized the 5 meliks of the Artsakh and joined with them to push the Ottoman forces out of the region. Do you see any parallels that potentially could happen in current?
Yes, I hear that in Yerevan, that's one of the other issues that goes with many in Armenia. They want peace. Everybody wants peace. They want peace, but they don't want to be contributing themselves to that peace. They will raise many toasts to our brave boys on the border, but they don't want their boys to be serving in the army. Similarly, somebody has to come and solve this security dilemma for us. If it's not them Russians who really double-crossed and, abneged on their obligations, an international treaty and agreement, then we're looking for someone else to replace them. And that's Iranians, because Iranians have been making all these statements, okay? Tehran has been saying, no change of borders, we're not going to tolerate this, red lines and whatnot. And they say, okay, so Iran may come and help us then in doing this. Of course, when Iranian diplomats, and Iranian diplomacy is much more seasoned and has long history and traditions, right? It's kind of a school with continuity almost, I mean, going back in time. When Iranian diplomats are saying that, you need to understand that they speak about their interests, obviously. And they even say what they're ready to do to protect those interests. And they even demonstrate, right? Because they run some exercises and whatnot. But I still have a question. If push comes to shove, and if it's going to be a very short deal, because with Armenian military, the way it is right now, I don't want to go into the details of the sad shape of the Armenian military right now. It's going to be maybe 48 hours that Turks and Azeris jointly may need to cut that corridor. I mean, maybe 48 is even an exaggeration. Would Iran start a war with Turkey over this? I don't know. I would put a big question mark on this, and I would say, instead of hoping that someone will come to help us, we're not going to do that, but they will come. It's in their interest. They will do that. It's a false mental model. We need to get rid of that. We first need to make sure that we are ready to do something about it, and then see who else is going to be ready to do that and who's going to be doing that. Well, I don't know if there are students of international relations in the audience. Assuming there is interesting research into commitments that different parties have been making and then reneging on their commitments, right? So there is a treaty, and then one of the parties is not implementing its obligations and commitments. Here, the Iranian side is not making any bilateral even commitments to the Armenian side. These are just statements. But that research shows that even when there are agreements and signed agreements, 30% of cases, it's not happening. In international relations, there is no such thing as enforcing the implementation of contract. There is no such. Who's going to enforce it? The worst that can happen is reputational losses. And then the player or an actor is weighing what's better for me, doing what's not in my existential interest, or caring about my reputation. Very quick example, Italy, before World War I, was part of an agreement, but they didn't enter the war, First World War. I'm just giving you one example. There are 30% of all those. We can go on and on. So I think part of the problem, again, with the Armenian public generally, is that we have this romanticized view of international relations. And we often, very quickly, especially in Armenia, they fall for any public statement. Oh, the French said this. The Russians condemned this. Iranians stated this and whatnot. Go after what they're doing, not what they're saying. Because saying is very cheap in international relations. As I said, it's only a matter of calculating your reputation. And if you don't believe me, ask the same Ukrainians. They had the Budapest Memorandum. They gave up their nuclear weapons because that's what the US and others wanted at the time, against them standing as guarantors of their territorial integrity. Where is that now? I mean, yes, they're saying, okay. Oh, it was not ratified. It was not ratified. That's why they didn't come to fight for Ukrainians. They have Ukrainians fight with Russia, but not themselves. Although The understanding was very different in 1992. Yes, it's good to have good relations with Iran. It's good if we understand that they have that interest and they're stating it. But as I said, I mean, don't rely just on the statements. It's us. We need to start from us. A house divided will fall. We need to put our own act together.
Yep. Thank you. Quick question here is, Mr. Mirzoyan has just announced today in meeting with the Turkish foreign minister that the opening of the Turkey-Armenia border is to be fast-tracked. What do we make of this? And what do we expect from this?
Well, if it's going to be fast-tracked, it means that the proposal that they sent to Baku, and we haven't seen what's in that proposal, is the one that, in Mirzoyan's understanding, is going to be okayed by Baku. So if it's going to be okayed by Baku, and that's Mirzoyan, again, I'm doing what I started as a negotiator, I always need to do. Need to put myself in his shoes. It's him saying that, right? He thinks
Correct.
It's going to be fast-tracked. If it's saying it's going to be fast-tracked, I'm saying, okay, I'm Mirzoyan. How I see it fast-tracked, when I know that Turkey is not going to do anything unless it hears from Baku. It means that Baku has received a proposal from Yerevan that I think, I'm Ara Mirzoyan now, God forbid, but I have to do that. I think that Baku is going to okay it. And if Baku okays it, then it's going to fast-track.
Second to the last question, where do you see?
But he may be, one second.
Sorry.
It doesn't mean that he may not be mistaken. That their proposal that they have sent to Baku, Baku is going to say, it's great, but now that you so much want that border to be opened, you already are making all these public statements, that your development is hinged on our goodwill to have the borders opened. Then this is one extra mile that you need to walk, Pashinyan. Do this and you'll get what you want. I do not rule out that, by the way.
Yep. We see that there is internal tension in Artsakh between Ara Nazarian, who is drinks from the same trough as Mr. Pashinyan, and we have Ruben Vartanian there. How do you see Ruben Vartanian be influential in the current situation for the Artsakh crisis?
Well, it's tough. I think, my personal opinion, Ara Nazarian needed to step down immediately after the war. My personal opinion. He stayed, continues to stay. He dealt with Pashinyan, and Pashinyan even allocated money from the Armenian state budget so that he can show to everybody that, no, we're supporting Artsakh, right? Where did that money go to? That money went to housing construction. Is housing construction a priority? Yes, probably, because there are many internally displaced or forced migrants, whatever term you want to use in Artsakh. They don't want to use the word refugees, right? They lost Hadrut, they lost here and there. So housing is necessary, right? Priority. Is it a top priority, if you ask me? Of course not. I said where the top priority was. Even in May last year, it was not too late to work on that top priority, that Azeris may block the road. But they decided that the top priority was the housing construction. Why? Well, it gives jobs. People like it. They're going to receive an apartments. I'm going to get popular, to say nothing of the corruption part that goes with construction almost in any country. And I'm not going to go deeper into that. Right. So he stayed. He wanted to leave earlier, but then others who also have, it's a very complex situation with clan interests in Artsakh. They urged him to stay. He stayed, and now he understands that he cannot take it anymore. He wants to resign and take the republic through elections, how those elections are going to run. Is Ruben Vartanyan a done deal? Is he going to be elected president? I mean, I don't know. I mean, if it's democracy, my answer would be, I don't know. Right? But assuming he has better chances to be elected, although Artsakhs have, always a preference for someone local to be running the affairs. But let's assume that he has, I don't know who's going to even run against him, right? He's going to be elected. If he's going to be elected, I can see it now, and I think it's going to be one of the handicaps that he will need to deal with, right? And to deal with it, he needs to start working on his strategy now as a negotiator. Because he lacks what negotiators call legitimacy of entry. Legitimacy of entry is about why you should negotiate with me if you can without. Why would you negotiate? Why Aliyev, or even someone he would appoint to negotiate, why he would negotiate with Ruben Vartanyan? Because he's the elected representative of Artsakh? Aliyev's response to that, we know already, I don't recognize any elections. What are you talking about? He's already started the campaign of denigrating Ruben, right? And not only him, but that even found its way to the Hard Talk on BBC. Okay, you appointed from Moscow, you are oligarch, blah, 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 and whatnot. Yes, he's going to be probably using the same kind of thing. I'm not negotiating with you. And it's not like, you cannot get the other side negotiate with you. We call that negotiation jiu-jitsu. There are ways to deal with that. But you need to start thinking and working in that direction before, not on the day you presumably are going to be elected president of Artsakh.
Yep. Thank you. So last question, we're up on the hour. Let's say by a miracle, Mr. Pashinyan resigned today, and an Armenocentric leader has taken the nation's reins. As we view the first 100 days of a new U.S. administration with great interest to set the stage for the coming years, what would you advise the next leader of Armenia to do in the first 100 days?
Well, I think my answer, in part at least, is obvious. First of all, it's going to be an opportunity to make a legitimate pause, right? So you're saying, I'm taking a timeout. And negotiators often do that. I need a timeout. And it's obvious that you are a new person, you need a timeout. Okay, a timeout. But it's not just a timeout to postpone the negotiations because you fear the negotiations with them or Americans or whoever. No. A, prepare, but most importantly, do what's necessary as a leader to provide the vision and to mobilize the nation in a consolidated way. And when you have that consolidated mobilization, your back is very strong. You walk into any negotiations then, it doesn't matter whether that's Russians, Iranians, Turks, Americans, Azeris, you are much more powerful than without. Pashinyan's weakness right now is also in his inability to consolidate and to negotiate on the internal track. He tried, but he cannot. He's much better at dividing. He's excellent at dividing. But here, a different skill is necessary, a different leadership is necessary to make a consolidated mobilization happen and stay that way for some time. It's almost like going to Israeli history in 1948 and saying, okay, we now recognized by UN, we are an independent state, we have our flag at the UN, it's great, right? So, done deal. No, they stayed consolidated almost through the 70s, 80s, and even in late 80s, it still is in some ways on some issues. Yes, they are divided, and there is this whole Netanyahu issue, and I saw some of the Jews and even colleagues of mine, Jews, who were protesting against Netanyahu as autocrat and anti-democratic leader and whatnot. But they kept it until all the state institutions were built. Everything is working smoothly right now in the state of Israel. The powers are separated. It is a republic in a true sense. It's not just one person's whim who can say, I negotiate any way I want and get away with that. That same person who was saying, no deal without consulting with you, my people. Right? So we need to understand what do we need. Next on the agenda in 100 days would be to change the whole game, to make that thing operational and possible. And the way I see it is make the participation of diasporans possible. True participation, political participation, not just writing a check, humanitarian, not just doing some lobbying, but really creating structures that would allow participation. We do not need to follow other nation-state models and saying that our nation-state is just within these borders. Okay, diasporans, you are there, you are diasporans. We'll call you our fellow Armenians or whatever, but we are not seeing you as part of the political nation. And I'm saying that's wrong. Why it's wrong? Because it's one other way of saying, young Turks, you were right, you achieved your goal. Armenians are never gonna be able to create a nation state in this area. They are divided, they are fragmented, and therefore no threat to us anymore. And we don't want to be a threat to anyone. We just want justice, and we want what we need to have in that place, that it's a viable nation state, protecting our identity, allowing it to develop.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Mr. Martirosyan for his insightful comments and our guests for joining and actively participating in this dialogue.